So we might get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this Beyond the Report webinar, Unleashing the Future of Consumer Energy. My name is Beth Brenoro, and I'm Leader of Innovation and Impact here at Race for 2030 Cooperative Research Centre. It is my great pleasure to introduce the proceedings today. I will start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the many lands that we are joining from today. I am on beautiful Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to Gadigal elders past and present, and I extend those respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have joined us today. Shortly, I will hand over to Race's Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Bill Lilly, and to Mark Patterson, Principal Systems Architect at Energy Catalyst, to present the background and findings of Race's recent report, Consumer Energy Unleashed, Creating a Better Energy System for All. Following the presentation, we are privileged to be joined by an excellent expert panel, with each panel member briefly sharing their own perspectives on the opportunities and challenges to unlock the potential of CER. These reflections will be followed by a Q&A session for the panellists, all Bill and Mark. Joining us on the panel, we have Alison Reeve, Deputy Program Director, Energy and Climate Program at the Grattan Institute, Andrew Lewis, Executive General Manager, Consumer Markets and Analytics at the Australian Energy Market Commission, Alida Janssen-van Thun, Head of DSO at Ausgrid, and Dr. Stephen Craig, Lead of the Smart Energy Mission at the CSIRO. Thank you all. And also joining us to moderate the panel and facilitate the open discussion, we are grateful to welcome Dr. Danny Alexander, the Chief Executive Officer at the University of New South Wales Energy Institute. UNSW has a long and outstanding history leading energy innovation, and we are proud that they are one of Race's core research partners. Thanks, Danny. Finally, before I hand over, we are using Slido to facilitate the Q&A session. The QR code will appear in the presentation, and the link is already pasted in the chat. So thanks again to you all for joining us, and I now hand over to Bill and Mark.
Okay. Thank you very much, Beth. Excellent introduction to our work. Mark, I guess you're going to go into full mode. I feel like I might have to give a strobe warning effect at the start of this. We have quite a lot of slides that Mark and I are presenting through, so we'll move through quite a few quickly. These slides can be shared for anyone that would like to look at them later or ask questions. So it's a privilege actually really to talk to this particular work today. Our agenda is really to give a welcome and overview, as Beth has done beautifully. Talk very quickly about Race for 2030, give some context to this grid transformation that we're seeing, and then I'll pass over to Mark to really talk through this particular report on our Consumer Energy Unleashed report. Finally, we'll have our then panel sections reflecting on the report, but also their reflections on the broader societal context and the change that we're sitting in today. And then we'll have a summary and close. Next slide, Mark. So our RACE stands for Reliable, Affordable, Clean Energy for 2030 for CRC. We're really focused on emissions reductions and a decrease in energy use for end users. But we know that to do that, that has to be within a whole of system element. So we are very much concerned with consumer energy resources, but in that whole of system lens. What does the best balance look like for all of society? Next slide, thanks, Mark. To do that, we have 5 research programs, and I won't go in those in detail here, but we have a business, homes, networks, EV, and a broader Race for Change program, which is really looking at this systematic transformation element. And within that, we have enabling programs and application programs. So next. But today, obviously, it's worth looking at and understanding how we've got to here and why this particular report's there. For those who know me, you'll know that I was actually out of the country for almost the entire portion of this particular slide. So in that 13 years that I was away, we saw an unprecedented growth in rooftop PV within the Australian context. And in this slide on the left, the top line in black is Australia. The bottom line in dashed is actually New Zealand, where I was talking about this just last week. And, we've been very much a world leader in that space, but we're also a laggard at the moment in terms of electric vehicle uptake. So we have a whole range of different aspects of consumer energy resources at different versions of, I guess, their application through our space and through our society. We have a lot that we can build on, and we've done an amazing work, and we'll have some of our panelists talk to that, but there's a lot more to do. Next, Mark. And this is reflected, I think, in this chart from AEMO. There's a massive amount of growth that we see from where we are today to where we're going forward. And this is all predominantly driven by renewables, rooftop solar, utility solar, offshore and onshore wind, and a whole lot of work in coordinated CER storage, and much more than utility storage. On the right, we see, scale factors of today until this future state. And you're talking 4, 5, 6, 7 times the amount of growth that we're seeing today. And this is, an unprecedented amount of growth, and will come with challenges. Next slide, Mark. And in that challenge, we're faced with the ability to plan and to develop our systems to do this. It's worth reflecting on just the difficulty we've had with this, not just nationally, but globally. And this particular slide here just highlights only in 2020, when the ISP was looking at the role of RES, just how far off it was in terms of the installed capacity. And we see this in Australia, we see this, across the world. And it makes planning and difficult. It makes it hard for investment cycles, and it becomes very difficult from a policy and regulatory perspective to help develop the tools that are required to make this happen. Next slide, Mark. And we'll see that, today reflected in the challenges. So if you go to AEMO's LinkedIn site, it seems like almost on a weekly basis, there will be some new record being broken, whether it's a minimum demand, operational demand, or a maximum operational demand. And we're really only at the beginning of that very transformational journey that AEMO is pointing out that we need in order to hit our net zero challenges. And so we've seen and understood, a sort of focus on the urgent near-term solutions to really keep the lights on. But we need a path now to really make forward how we can get to this future state, avoid these problems, and really develop up a system that's coherent and flexible and agile. Next, Mark. And so that gives me the pleasure then to lead into this chat for Mark. Mark will talk to the work that Race and Mark and his team at Energy Catalyst have done to really explore a lot of what's happened in that historical context in those slides that we talked to, but also the future path forward in order to tackle this large challenge that we're facing today.
Great. Thanks so much, Bill. And thanks everyone for participating in today's session. Good to see so many of you participating. As Bill mentioned, it's been a real privilege for my team at Energy Catalyst to work with Race for 2030 on this project. And particularly, I think, to take a fairly innovative approach to this topic of unleashing the full value of consumer energy. And obviously, just in terms of the strategic objective of the report, really what we've tried to do here is to examine Australia's portfolio of CER studies, trials, and demonstration projects. We've wanted to do that to map the potential gaps that must be addressed if we're going to unleash their full potential. And this is really the punchline. Unleash the full potential of our millions of consumer energy resources, distributed energy resources, to enable efficient, low-carbon, self-balancing future power systems that serve the long-term interest of all consumers. And we recognise that, as Bill's mentioned, that Australia has really an unparalleled level of rooftop solar. As recently in Europe, the Netherlands is their poster child with regard to rooftop solar. But they were pretty blown away with what's happening in this country. It's probably worth just mentioning at the outset as well that we recognise that we've tried to cover a ton of territory in this report. We recognise that there's particular scope and other limitations to the report, and we touch on that later on. So I just flag that at the outset. So I guess and for clarity in terms of terminology, by CER and DER, we mean in the case of consumer energy resources, we're talking about small to medium-sized resources are located behind the meter at residential, commercial, and industrial premises. And they consist of a range of different technologies that you can see on screen there. What we're not just talking about is rooftop solar. We are talking about a range of different energy resources that are showing up at massive scale behind the meter. But obviously the term DER is also still used and appropriately used for pretty much the same technologies where they're located front of meter or directly connected to the distribution system. So just to be clear on what we are referring to there. In terms of how we've gone about this report, we really tried to take a pretty unique systems-based approach to analysing CER integration across the end-to-end power system. And we've done that by really looking at the grid transformation landscape in Australia against a number of different high-level questions, and then 6 different research themes or topics for consideration. First of those is the question of to what extent has our applied research around this topic given consideration to the end state, the future direction of where the power system is actually going, and particularly what are the customer and societal objectives that we're needing to achieve from our future power systems. And for that matter, obviously, what is the role that we want CERs and DERs to be playing as we move forward into the future. The second major high-level focus area is in light of where the power system is going and the work that we need to do to really build clarity about that. What are the technological, market, regulatory, and operational enablers that are required to deeply integrate and fully leverage, fully unlock the massive societal and system value of CERs and DERs. And in this particular case, we've focused on 4 different themes, which is around the end-use solution innovations, market pricing and regulatory innovations, whole system planning capability and operations, and LV system planning capability and operations. And then the 6th theme really corresponds to the topic of, in light of where the power system is going and the whole range of things that we need to do to ready the system for that, how might we enable that scale and pace of transformation in the quite limited time we have to transform one of the most complex, largest and most complex systems we've ever created in an unprecedented space of time. And so those 6 themes really provide a lens through which we've then been able to interrogate almost 200 different studies, trials, and demonstrations to really look at where are the key gaps and what might we need to be focusing on in the next phase of research. And just for clarity on that as well, that when we have looked at the almost 200 trials, 182 to be specific of studies and trials, sorry, I'll just jump back one, that we've done that in a manner that, I'm not sure why that's jumping forward and backwards, but obviously it wants me to reiterate the point. So we've really tried to sort of map this out in a reasonably objective way to evaluate each of the initiatives that we've looked at against this kind of taxonomy of 1 through 7 scoring. And really what that is doing is just setting an objective basis for evaluating the comparative levels of focus per projects and research topic, and really in a movement from desktop studies through trials, demonstrations, and in the direction of full BAU deployment. In other words, what we're trying to say is, as we look at all the different things that have been done, how do we have at least some sort of comparative basis for evaluating the level of focus given to each research topic in each project? And just to give you, a visual of that, I thought that, for my team, it was useful to sort of get it out of the digital and into the analog and actually print these kind of mappings of the 182 CER-DER initiatives that were reviewed across approximately 11,000 points of evaluation against 6 research themes, 15 domains, and 61 research topics. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The heat mapping itself that you can see here is really highlighting different levels of focus on different aspects of that whole of system transformation landscape. White space.
Sorry, Mark, just jumping in there, your sound has gone. Is anybody else having the same issue?
Okay.
Yes, we all are.
Okay.
Let me just drop. Yeah, this audio is no good.
You're very low.
Okay. All right. Well, let me just pause for a moment and try and address.
Yeah, we can't hear still.
All right. Let me just try something else.
It was fine before.
It was fine, Mark, and you're a little bit better now. Maybe just come a bit closer. Give us a better shot of your headshot, mate.
All right. How's that? Is that
Yep,
any
that's okay.
better? Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll try and speak up, and I'll just jump back to where we were. So basically the main point I was making there was that the white space really just highlights some of the areas where we need to give focus to in terms of the connective tissue. And I guess
Switch to full screen, Mark.
right, here we go. So gotta love those technology challenges. Okay, so why is it actually important to deal with this topic from a whole system approach to transformation? And fundamentally, that's because in the Australian context, we now have a situation where, excuse me, whole regions are at certain points of the 24-hour cycle, almost 100% supplied locally. In the same evening, that same area may be 100% supplied from the central system. So the system, our power systems are becoming increasingly tidal, which requires an entirely new level of dynamic whole system interdependence. And this is, again, really unparalleled on a global scale, and why we need to look at the system and the topic of CERs and DERs, not just from an interesting technology point of view, but how do we systemically integrate them into the system as a whole? So what we found with this work was that when we sort of map those 182 studies, trials, demonstrations against the 6 different research themes and 61 research topics, we identified that there'd been certainly a strong emphasis on 2 in particular of the themes, those being the end-use solution innovations and the theme 2 and theme 5 being the LV system planning capability and operations. As you can see, less focus on themes 3 and 4, and very limited focus on themes 1 and 6. In other words, where is the system actually, where are we trying to take the system, and how are we actually going to get there? So this is kind of illuminating in terms of where the areas of emphasis have been in the first, what I would consider the first major phase of research, which has been in the order of about $1 billion of expenditure across those 182 studies and trials. It's fair to say as well, as we do in the report, that some of the projects that have taken a more holistic approach, and we particularly mentioned Project Edge, Symphony and Edith, and we'll touch on those in a moment, have certainly tried to take a more holistic view on a number of these points as well. So just make that point as well. When you drill down into the 6 themes, this just gives you a bit of a sense of the proportionality across the 6 themes. And as you can see, theme 5, 42% of the focus, followed by theme 2, which is 26%, contrasted between, with 1% and, 1% with regard to theme 6 and 8% with regard to theme 1. So you can see quite a level of difference in focus. And then when you take that down to the 15 research domains, again, you get another sense of the proportionality of focus across those. Ton of detail in the report, which I won't labor now, but I will just highlight here that, and this is just again illustrative of two of those large demonstration projects, Project Edith and Project Symphony, and we're privileged to have a leader, Janssen van Vuren, with us as well, who's led the Edith project. And this just gives you a bit of a sense of how some of those larger projects have also attempted to span a range of those different themes and research topics. So coming to, really just to the punchline with this, when it comes to the high-level findings of this work, what do we learn? Well, firstly, there's obviously a ton of extensive knowledge that we have learned around this research that has been primarily focused, if you like, on the end-use technologies and distribution network operations and capabilities. It's noteworthy that, as you would expect, that most of this work has been conducted within the historical segments of the legacy supply chain. And they've been largely focused or predominantly focused on mitigating the negative operational impacts that can arise from the integration of CER/DER. And again, you would probably expect that with something like this as an initial phase of saying, well, how do we avoid CER/DER from impacting the system in a negative manner? Thirdly, what we found as well is that given that there's been what I would say is probably mostly an issue in isolation approach to technology research and so on, what we haven't had a particular focus in many of those projects of really mandate to say, well, where are our power systems heading? What are the comprehensive range of functions that we want CER and DER to perform in these systems? And how might we actually transform these complex grids to fully unleash the customer and societal and system benefits? Obviously, we've had a lot of focus on supply side augmentation, and we need to have that. And it's probably fair to say there hasn't been an equivalent level of focus on the full integration of these demand side resources. Fourthly, building on that, the whole profile of research has probably been impacted by the fact that we haven't had any authoritative positive vision for how we want CER and DER to function as part of an integral and equal part of the power system, or how our ambitions for unlocking its full customer, societal, and system value. Fifthly and sixthly, the fifth point here is really to say that given the scale of transformation that we're confronting, we really are in what I think of as the foothills of the Himalayas. We're still at a high altitude, but we have an awful long way to go to the peak of Everest, if you like. And so most of the trials and studies appear to have generally assumed or have no mandate at all to examine a really critical question, and that is whether Australia's legacy structural and market arrangements are actually capable of scaling to operationally coordinate the levels of CER and DER that we all envisage in our 2050 scenarios, and as you can see to the right of the screen there. And that's a really fundamental question that needs to be addressed. And sixthly, as I said, generally, I think it's fair to say that our progress in this area has been strong, but it's been impeded by a lack of systems-based approach to CER integration and deferral of several foundational matters, which is pleasing to see now the National CER Roadmap is taking up some of these, which includes distribution system operator topics. There's a need to really address transmission distribution interface models and also the underpinning cyber physical architectures and functional roles with all those entities. Just lastly, I'll just highlight that we then sort of we go from those observations to 3 target objectives, which was really about saying, well, so what? What do we do about this? How might we actually invest our next, if we're going to invest another $1 billion in this topic, which we need to do, and we need to really fully leverage this critical and massive capability for the nation. Well, how do we do that? And really, we've focused very much on aligned vision and enablement, really going after holistic societal outcomes, not just being satisfied with outputs in terms of more research reports, more studies, more activity. We need to be going after the the societal outcomes in the tens of billions of dollars of value, and to do that in a manner that's efficient and accelerated by giving effect to that in a very structured, integrated way. And I'll just highlight really just in 3 slides, without talking through the detail, that there are 12 recommended actions that sit under those 3 target objectives that really are about how do we build that alignment, how do we take a whole system approach to really treating this valuable mass deployed resource as a really critical and integral part, an equal part of our self-balancing power systems. And then how do we do that in a manner that actually makes sure that we get even better bang for buck out of every dollar we spend on this, such that we can make much more rapid progress at a national level over the next number of years. And so I think last slide here, just to highlight that given that we've dealt with a whole span of different projects, tens of thousands of pages of research reports and so on, we don't suggest that this is absolutely exhaustive. We certainly don't make commentary on the inherent value, completeness, or veracity of each individual project, not at all. The main aim of this work has really been to zoom out and say, how do we look at all of the work we've been doing, broadly speaking, and how do we make sense out of that and really look at what are the critical gaps that we would need to address to fully unleash the massive societal and system value and customer value from this valuable resource that Australia has. And with that, I will drop the slides down, and I will hand to Danny Alexander.
Thank you very much, Mark and Bill. What an excellent presentation that you've provided today on such an important report to progress us through to this next phase of work where we are harnessing the opportunity that lies within consumer energy resources. At this point, I think there's an opportunity to bring together the panel that we have for the next discussion, which I'm delighted to share this virtual room with. It's a wonderful complementary set of expertise across the sector to comment on this topic, and wonderful. I think we're all convened here in the virtual room now. So just to begin the discussion, I'd love to get your first reflections in the panel here on this report and the comments that have just been made. I might just hand directly to who's at my right, which is Alida.
Great, thanks, Danny. And congratulations to everyone that's been involved in putting this report together and going through all the details of the various trials. One thing that really struck me when I read the report is that it's the first time that I saw a framework that brought together a holistic view on what are the research topics or what are the areas that we need to explore to advance this space. And particularly then having broken that down into more specific things and the comparison with what we're seeing internationally is really useful for giving context. And in particular, the topic for me that stood out is the research theme 1, where we talked about that talks about customer societal objectives for the transformation. And I think what's interesting about that is we always sit in these kind of rooms and we talk about we need to have the customer voice in everything that we do. But it's probably the first time that I can see in the context exactly how powerful that can be, and that really where the customer voice belongs is in setting the vision for what we are doing, alongside the what. So what is it that customers are going to interact with and how they're going to do that? It's that vision piece, and that's clearly something that we all feel is missing. And I think that's why we also feel like the customer voice is often missing out of these research topics. So I found that quite useful. Seeing that assessment done on Project Edith was also interesting because my team and I didn't sit down and go, let's hit these research topics and see what we can do. We just thought what it would be a trial that would move things forward. And I think it can be a really useful tool when we are designing research or trials or policy even, to use something like this as a reference, to think about all the dimensions that you may want to include, and to be sort of intentional about what you choose to focus on as well. So very excited about it. It's a tool that I think is useful for research, for industry. And so just, yeah, congratulations to the team for putting it together.
Thank you, Alida. Alison, you're next on my window. Would you like to provide your perspective?
Thank you. Look, similar to Alida, I would say congratulations and also thank you. As someone who never has time to read all of the reports that are in this space, it is always very valuable when someone else reads them all and puts them together in. And I mean, one of the things that I thought was quite interesting, and I think this is a bit similar to what Alida was saying, you can see where the gaps are. You can see where we've had a lot of focus, but you can also see some important areas where maybe there hasn't been as much research as there needs to be, particularly if we are going to turn this research into policy change. I think when I was sort of seeing your pie charts, one of the things that was playing in my mind was like, man, there's a real missed opportunity there with a lot of those projects, particularly where they were real world projects, to measure consumer attitudes and that sort of stuff at the same time. And that if we had gotten that really granular information, that would have been really awesome for where we need to go next. So, you know, to me, that's one of the things that perhaps we need to start thinking about, is any future technical studies that we need that happen in this area really need to be cross-disciplinary and to bring in the social sciences as well, so that we can get those two sets of information meshing together, because we're going to need both of them if we want to change this into, you know, one of the things Mark talked about was that this sort of underlying assumption that we're working with the legacy rules. If we want to change the legacy market rules, we're going to need both pieces of information in order to do that.
Andrew, I think that probably leads to you. Thinking about legacy rules, could you provide your comments?
Sure. Again, I'll just echo congratulations to Mark and the entire team for the work that's being done. And yeah, I think it really is the synthesizing of the key findings, the common outcomes, the highlighting of the gaps where things haven't been done is a really, really valuable part of this report and what it presents. I think it certainly provides a good opportunity, particularly in the context of the CER roadmap and the work that's being done to progress and unlock and unleash CER, in terms of we don't have to keep doing the same pilots and trials to prove things. We've got the evidence base to be building off, but at the same time highlighting where actually some of, if there are, you know, where we still do need to do things, highlighting where the focus needs to be, and absolutely understanding that for a future energy environment, the traditional rules and approaches are not necessarily going to be appropriate fit for purpose, and understanding, you know, using this as to help understand better what changes do need to occur, how we need to respond, how we need to enable and overcome the barriers that are hindering some of the developments that have been highlighted in these vast number of the studies and trials is one of the key things and elements that certainly the AMC is looking at, and we're talking about quite a lot.
Thank you, Andrew. Stephen, I'm going to hand over to you now, I guess drawing again on Alison's call for cross-disciplinarity and, dare I say, cross-institutional projects as well. Maybe you could also, when you comment, just provide a short summary of the Smart Energy Mission.
Yeah, sure, happy to. And thanks very much. And congratulations again from me to Mark, the team, Bill, everyone for doing this. Any sort of positive change, you know, sort of rests on an understanding of current state. And it's a really impressive and comprehensive piece of work to assemble this current state around CRDR research. So congratulations on that. Yeah, a few reflections. Just and one of these was the findings as well. Is the framing a lot of the CRD research as something that's happening to the system, rather than a strategic objective or part of a desired future state. And I think if that's the framing, it's fairly natural. And Mark said this. to be focusing on how do we minimize the risks, how do we manage this, rather than how do we unlock the full whole of system opportunity. And I think a first key step is actually reframing, challenging our mental models of what a large-scale power system looks like, and incorporating CER-DR as a core component of that target future state. So I think the first step, as highlighted in the report, which is really well articulated, is that reframing and then sort of accepting there may be the need for deeper structural change and a systematic transformation process to get to the future. Also highlighted in the report is the fact that there is a discipline of engineering, that if we do that reframing and take that approach, that can really help us to structure, guide and de-risk the process. So that's systems engineering, which is a well-established, mature discipline of engineering that's used in other sectors to do exactly this. And I think there are a number of quite mature and transferable methods, tools and experience that can help us in energy. A couple of examples that came to mind that were mentioned in the report: defence. Like energy, it's a means to an end, national security in that case. Like energy, it's multidisciplinary and it's got both hard and soft components. And like energy, there's very high complexity and constant change. Another one, mobile communications, it's a means to an end. Consumer assets are an integral part of the system. And if you think about what the mobile communication system is, it's just a giant orchestration system for consumer assets. And we all use it every day. And there are benefits in that for both the consumers and the system. So it's really great to see systems engineering starting to come into energy through things like global power system transformation, and work at AEMO, but there's an opportunity to do more and engage with that systems engineering community more. And in fact, the annual conference of the Systems Engineering Society of Australia is next week in Melbourne, and energy is one of the topics. So it's really, really good to see that happening. Finally, yes, the smart energy mission at CSIRO. So really, the missions program is about addressing the large national challenges we have in Australia. Energy transformation is one of them. So I lead the Smart Energy mission that draws together the different disciplines, the different research capabilities across CSIRO to help address this big challenge in collaboration with others, such as the Race for 2030 CRC. One of our roles as the National Science Agency is to develop and curate national research infrastructure on behalf of the nation. And one of the key objectives of smart energy is to establish the National Energy Analysis Centre, NEAC, as an example of enduring national research infrastructure to support, in this case, the whole of system transformation, which will be going on for decades. And there will be this recurring need to understand, analyse, learn, and de-risk this whole process. The two main components of the National Energy Analysis Centre will be a large-scale living lab. So we'll have real people in real environments, and of course they are the owners of CER and DR, and this is based on a very successful model in the United Kingdom, run by Energy Systems Catapult. And the other part is a data nexus, where we take this modern systems engineering and system science and make it available to everybody to become a little bit more streamlined and coherent in how we go about the work, including the transition to a high CER-DR system. So key initiative at CSIRO, part of our role, and hopefully it's addressing part of this recommendation 3.2, I think it is, around enduring national capability to support what's needed.
Thank you, Stephen. At this point, I have a few other questions up my sleeve, and it's my prerogative as chair to ask them. But I have seen that the Slido is starting to get a little bit more active, and I would encourage those who haven't yet clicked that link to go in there and have a look. And if you are not putting your own question there, upvote questions that you would like to hear from. There is one in there actually that might be quite simple that for Mark to put in the chat, which is whether there's a report, a list in the report of all of the projects that you've analysed there. So perhaps, Mark, you might be able to also respond to that in the chat while we go through. But I did really want to ask a question first, possibly with Alison starting us off, but others please join as well if you'd like. We've heard some very large figures representing the total economic benefit that comes from CER orchestration or coordination, maybe most recently by ENA in the order of $7 billion per annum by 2030. But from your perspective, what is the biggest barrier to realising those benefits?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important when we get those numbers to see whether you can split them into public benefit and private benefit. My recollection of the ENA work was most of that was a private benefit for the person who did the activity, and only a small amount of it ended up as the public benefit. If you look at the sensitivity scenario that was in the ISP this year, there was like an extra 4 billion of public benefit over 25 years spread across 10 million users, which is actually $18 a year per user. So it's actually quite tiny. So it's important, I think, to distinguish between those two. But the other thing that I think comes into that is that when you do those calculations, and I'm guilty of this myself, right? You tend to assume that the people involved have an infinite amount of time, and that time is zero cost. And the thing is that particularly when we're talking about households, that's a really bad assumption to make. And I think this is why we sort of end up in this world where, similar to what has happened in the more traditional energy efficiency things for a really long time, we have report after report after report that finds that the benefit is there, but it is really hard to mobilize it. And the thing is, with that, I think, is that if you keep finding that, that means there's another barrier there that you're not seeing. And my hunch is that that barrier is about people's time and how complicated it is to do whatever the thing is, you know, get yourself set up for your EV to do dynamic charging, or, you know, finally get around to getting your 3 quotes to get solar on your roof, or whatever that is. And so it's the time and the complexity that potentially are acting as a barrier. And so when we think about how we scale this stuff, and particularly when we're thinking about, you know, effectively systemizing it, I think a lot of what we should be doing there is thinking, how do we take the complexity out of it so that it is quick and easy to do? Because the thing that is quick and easy to do will be the thing that gets done.
There is also another question here from Matthew Holt, who says he's specifically focused on a trial for low-income households and including these homes for net zero. I think there's a financial cost barrier there, and his question is, how do you suggest we overcome the upfront cost barrier in this trial, but also, I guess, rolling out more broadly?
Yeah. I mean, look, depending on what state you're in, there's, you know, various things around that assist with upfront costs. But this is one of the things that we can't get away from, is that most of this stuff does involve an upfront cost and an ongoing benefit. And one of the things that we tend to do as humans is we put a lot of weight on upfront costs and we don't put much weight on ongoing benefits. We tend to discount them a lot. You know, and it's, you know, if I asked you, would you like $5, you know, can I take $5 from you today on the promise that you'll get $50 next year? If you really trusted me, you might do it, but a lot of the time you probably wouldn't. So some of that is, I think, finding ways where we can get the benefit and the cost to align. And there's sort of two ways you can do that. You can reduce the cost right down so that it doesn't feel like a big barrier, or you can spread the cost over time so that it aligns with the benefit. My dream is that you would be able to get, you know, exactly what you get for other, if we're talking about households, what you get for other things that cost a lot of money. A car costs a lot of money, but a car loan allows you to spread the cost of that over time. A massive widescreen TV costs a lot of money, but a Harvey Norman style 6 months interest free, no repayments until this year type financing package allows you to spread that cost over time. And so, you know, to me, that is the thing. And again, it might be another interesting thing that we need to get into and look at with research, is how do we make the financing work? How do you make those sorts of deals available for things around demand side participation, because that is what makes it quick and easy for people to get into this space.
Thank you, Alison. Andrew, I'd like to ask you a question now. I recently did a very short piece of work just to have a look at what was happening in the rule change space, and realized that the AEMC is doing an incredible amount of work, and there are several parallel but related initiatives related to CER. Can you articulate what the common objective is, outcome or goal that you have across all of those projects that are happening concurrently?
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I guess give you a very short answer first. It's to remove the barriers. It's to look at sort of, you know, what is particularly in the rules, and in some cases the law, where there are things that are preventing or minimising the value and the impact of, or getting in the way of the different aspects of that are needed to support CER. So you're right. We're doing a lot of different rule changes and policy projects, and there is an overarching objective, which is how can we continue to support and encourage and enhance through enablement the innovation and the development of orchestration, coordination, the unlocking of CER. So whether that's through our integrating price responsive resources work, where we've put out a draft determination, which is really about sort of allowing providing a market for orchestration and VPP, so allowing them to get the value of the wholesale market effectively from operators from doing that. In terms of our unlocking CER benefits work, it's really about recognising that there are different types of CER, and having it all sit behind effectively one master meter without being able to necessarily have more granular control or access to those is potentially problematic. So it's trying to overcome that barrier. Obviously, we're in the midst of doing work around trying to accelerate the rollout of smart meters, and of course, data is a key enabler here. So in the jurisdictions that you know, other than Victoria, that don't have near 100% rollout of smart meters, and the data that enables for both the household and the market, we're focusing on sort of trying to accelerate that because of the power that the data has to support CER activity. We're doing we've just kicked off our review of sort of pricing and what that means for a future environment, particularly with CER, but also for consumers that aren't able to take up as much CER as well, to really project ahead in terms of what, you know, if there's when CER is unleashed, actually what are the products and services that will be available, and how will both retail and network tariffs, pricing, incentives work best particularly from the consumer perspective. To Alison's point that she was making before, it's how do we make things simple, easy, understandable, you know, low challenge, not having to invest a lot of time piggybacking off the availability of data and the smarts that, you know, AI and orchestration can present, so that ultimately consumers and the market and society can benefit from this, but in the, you know, maximize the benefit with the least effort in some way. So that's kind of that's the long way of how our work is tying together, and we'll be doing more and more on this. But yeah, we're certainly very keen and enthusiastic to be really focusing on those, not only sort of fixing those enablers that are within our control, but also calling out where some of the broader reforms, particularly in the policy space, that are sort of where the market itself can't deliver the solution, and there needs to be other mechanisms and solutions to complement the work that's being done within the energy industry.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a huge job, a huge task that you've set yourself, but I understand that there's lots of people supporting that work and lots of engagement across the sector, which is fantastic. I'd like to pass to Alida now and ask the question to just focus on a particular topic. I think you've noted in the past that despite Australia leading the world in the penetration of CER or DER, the report is finding that we significantly lag in international best practice on distribution system operator models and functions. And I think this is something that even Mark was inherently involved with in an earlier life in the work under Open Energy Networks. Why do you think we haven't made much progress in this area in Australia?
Yes, thanks, Danny. Yes, I think about this every day. And I think the first thing that strikes me is that we have a very complex industry, right? I think everyone agrees, but we've got a disaggregated supply chain. We've got a complex policy landscape as well, where each state government is responsible for energy. And although we have agreement that the states will work together and work through organizations like the AEMC, they still go rogue every now and then. And so in the context of that, it makes sense that people will start just picking point solutions, right? So and I think that's why the research themes of what becomes something that people quite often focus on and just say, well, I could do this technology because I know this is in my space and I can do this. And it's hard to really get progress on things like DSO, which is that part where we're starting to rethink the roles within the industry. We also have just a lot of different people with vested interest in various ways within the system as well. And so when you're talking about new roles, there's always contention, and it's not really sure who the decision makers is or how those things progress necessarily. So that's all dark and gloomy, but it's like, what do you do from there? I think there's sort of two things. The first one is I find that when you take a bunch of people in the industry from all different walks of life and you put them in a room for long enough, they tend to agree on quite a number of really foundational things. And so I think when we do initiatives and projects, like we were doing in Project Edith, which is very much around some of that DSO thinking, it is about forming coalitions and bringing others into the project and co-designing what it looks like and being open that the design you might have had in mind in the beginning might not be where you end when you start actually testing those things. So we're very excited, for instance, at the moment to have had Energy Australia and Origin and Shine Hub join Edith as well. And that's given us a whole new different view on this stuff. And I think that's really important. And being vulnerable as well and quite open with your partners about what are your drivers, what are your incentives and what you're trying to get out of it, and have open conversation about that. But I think the other thing that's really important in this space from a policy perspective is to be thinking around incentives, right? So what incentives is our regulatory framework putting on different parts of the system, and particularly when it's regulated, right? So I don't think anyone would be really surprised if I say networks are incentivized to build network, because that is what the regulatory framework incentivizes us to do. So DSO is actually trying to say, how can we make more use of existing capacity and reward customers for their flexibility and do all these things, but we haven't incentivized networks to do that. So your key player that you need to really come to the table to help with the design doesn't have the right incentives on them.
There is a question here, and it's the one that's received the most votes that I think relates to what you've been talking about, Alida. It comes from Benji Lee, who says that this research also highlights the need for greater collaboration and cultural change in the sector. And he's interested in the panel's thoughts on how we can impactfully move the dial on this. So maybe I'll just give you, Alida, just a chance just to maybe hone in on your comments on that, because you did allude to it, but then offer an opportunity for the rest of the panel also to comment on this question.
Yeah, this is a tough one because we do collaborate, I think, as an industry. I like this report is an example of some of the things that we do. But I do think if we had a way, and I think some of the recommendation report links to that, if we had a way of funding being linked to collaboration. And of course, it is through ARENA and through CRCs, but that being quite foundational, and there being a vision that sits over that funding, and that you kind of you have to form coalitions in order to get access to that funding. I think that will go a far way in changing the culture.
Wonderful. Who would like to take the next stab at this?
I'll have a stab at it, Danny, because it's a good example of why we did this piece of work to start with. And it was really there to look at this landscape to make sure that we weren't seeing duplication or significant duplication across the industry, and to look for where those gaps are, but to provide an overarching framework as to why we do things. And our CRC, amongst others, provides one avenue in that innovation landscape to help that process. And certainly we were using this to frame up the research that we look to do. And a number of our recent large-scale projects, if I think of something like Energy Masters or Scenarios for Future Living, which we've done recently, are really based around this, trying to get that whole of system approach and use us as a catalyst for that change. So certainly there's multiple avenues to do that, but take my own selfish view at that at the moment, that this is what we were aiming to do with this particular piece of work, and why it was instrumental for us to try and help frame and understand the work we should be doing collectively.
And maybe if I can just pile on there a little bit as well, Danny. So I think great comments. And I think one of the major challenges that we've got in this space, I think there is a cultural dimension, but there's also a structural dimension. And what's interesting about culture shaping is that culture tends to kind of evolve or be guided by the structures that are in place in an organization and so on. And so if in fact, you've got to follow the breadcrumb trail on what is it that is actually causing us to sort of have difficulty in dealing with some of these things. One of the things is that we have, as we all know, a structurally separated sector. There's a lot of different silos. Those silos have all functioned well in an environment where we had a bulk delivery, one-directional system. What we're now talking about, if we just take the DSO topic, for example, a DSO, by definition, when you look globally, is not just a sort of a glorified DNSP. It does many things that a DNSP does, but it also has a range of new functions that are not only about the LV system and low voltage system, but also the relationship between that low voltage system and the bulk power system in ways that we didn't need to have in the past. What that means practically is that you've now got this thing called the DSO that actually boundary spans silos that in ways that we never have had to kind of collaborate across some of those boundaries in the detailed ways that we now need to. So there's cultural questions, there's sort of individual questions, there's organizational questions. But the one thing I would say, and why we sort of highlighted some, the fact that ultimately we're in the Himalayas. Everyone's looking at Australia, but we're still in the foothills of the Himalayas. And we're en route to the peak of Everest. And so the real question is, will the approach to change that we've been applying and that we document in the report, is that capable of getting us from the foothills to the peak of Everest? And I think it's fair to say it's not going to. That we actually need to do a whole lot of things in parallel path one, which is keep the lights on, keep the system operating, address all of the near-term urgent issues. That's mission critical. But just as mission critical is how do we collectively build out parallel path two, which is about, in buying ourselves some time, how do we do the hard thinking as to how we actually successfully track to the apex of Everest in a way that just the current sort of elements of scattergun of things is just not going to get us there. So I think just the DSO issue is a really good example of how we need to build some new capabilities and approaches for how we address those boundary spanning topics.
Thank you. And yes, recognizing your expertise, we have slightly tipped the gender balance of our panel here suddenly on the screen, but I think they're all excellent points. But I think it is worth covering some of the other questions that we have here, because there's been a bit of a flurry in the background here. I'm going to take the opportunity to ask one that I haven't seen before, which comes from Sam, and I might direct it to Alison in the first instance, but also feel free to pass if it's something that you'd like to get someone else to answer. But it is interesting. Sam says, is there a need to think about an anti-fragile version of the electrical energy system, much like the internet?
I think there is. I mean, we saw how fragile the existing system is in 2022 when we suddenly had a confluence of just, a couple of events. You had high coal prices, high gas prices, a couple of fossil fuel plants that went offline, and a particular period of weather, and all of a sudden the whole market fell apart to the point where it wasn't a market anymore. So I think we've sort of seen, we have had this market that's been very based on or a system based on, a very just-in-time kind of delivery model. And one of the things that I think happens as we move more and more of the economy to being dependent on the electricity network as part of the overall decarbonisation journey, we probably need to rethink how we value reliability and whose responsibility it is to maintain reliability. Now, there's a couple of traps in that. There is the potential that we overspend. I mean, one of the jokes that we make at Grattan is that the person in the country who puts the highest value on reliability is the Minister for Energy. And they are willing to pay billions of dollars or get consumers to pay billions of dollars for reliability, because they're the ones who has to front up to the cameras when the lights go out. And so there is, I think this is something we need to look at, but I think we also, and I think this is something where the demand side and the consumer side actually have a role to play in that anti-fragility as well. Because I think my hunch is, if you go and actually talk to individual consumers about what do you want and what are you willing to pay, people might be willing to pay more if that means that they get a battery behind the meter to give them the reliability, but they would not be willing to pay the same amount on their bills in order to just make the whole network, to harden the network. And so I think we need to be asking them the question about what they value, and we need to be asking that in a way that opens up a lot of options and that focuses on the idea of that this is not about the 10 minutes a year that we're allowed to have the lights out. It's actually about what's the service that you want, and under what circumstances, would you tolerate the lights going out? I don't care if the lights go out for 2 hours between midnight and 2 a.m. because I'm asleep, right? But if it goes out for 10 minutes in the last quarter of the grand final, when your team is 2 goals behind, you care very deeply. So we need a way of unpicking not only it's sort of more the value of reliability and why do we value it. And I think we need to really bring that conversation into conversations about the security and the reliability of the network, and make sure that we're looking at all of the possible options, not just a ramped up standard on retailers or something like that.
And if I can add to that, Alison, I think the thing we have to get comfortable, and it's easy for me to say this because I'm not the Minister of Energy, is that we're going to fail, right? Things are going to go pear-shaped in the transition. And I remember being in South Australia, I worked at SA Power Networks during the statewide blackout that happened. It was very exciting for all the engineers in the room. But that night, I was with some friends who played cards on candlelight, and I was driving back home, and I was listening to the news, and they were saying there's chaos in the CBD in Adelaide, and it was dead. There was no one in the CBD in Adelaide. There was no chaos at all, right? And so I think it's very easy for us to catastrophize when these kind of events happen, rather than realizing that we need to learn from it, right? So if these things just happen and we don't address it, then of course we should be outraged as a society. But it will happen as we move to more and more renewable energy, as we transition all the constructs of the system, these things will happen. And as long as we learn from it, I think that's okay. And so perhaps building on what you're saying, Alison, is that we need to understand what customers actually value rather than have a knee-jerk reaction to any kind of failure that is going to inevitably happen as we transition.
Yeah, there are some really interesting conversations going on in the space around people who work on community resilience, particularly in the wake of things like the floods and Black Summer and so on, of really understanding what, what services communities want and in what form, and, that, and one of the things that I really noticed that came out in those conversations around electricity is people are like, no, you don't have to have the lights back on within an hour. It's kind of like, I need somewhere where I can charge my phone, use a microwave to heat up some food and give the kids a bath. And if that means that I need to go to the community centre because it's going to take 3 weeks to get the lights back on, what you need to tell me is that this is going to take 3 weeks and I can plan around that, right? And so that resilience conversation is actually a lot more nuanced when you get down into exactly what do people want and why and where.
Andrew, do you have any points of view before I ask another question?
Oh no, nothing really to add. I think Alison and Alida have given a very comprehensive responses to that one.
Wonderful. Stephen, you came off mic mute for a moment.
Yeah, I was just going to offer a sort of complementary engineering type perspective. Something that we talk about in Smart Energy at CSIRO is resilience by design, noting that we are transforming the system, we're changing the system. In parallel, we have, a changing climate. We have changes to supply chains. We have cyber risks and so on. So how can we view resilience as a design goal and be sort of proactive, or as proactive as we can, about mitigating the risks? And the only way of doing that is to take a system-based approach with these types of systems tools.
Can I ask a question here that's come from John Judson, who I know has got a vested interest in the success of RACE and has a lot of relationships with people that are in this virtual room, who's asked a technical question, which is, what is going to be done to provide plug and play interoperability and to call out operators that don't want to give access to their equipment? I don't know, Stephen, if you'd like to extend your initial comments.
What's going to be done, I'm not sure. I know I can highlight something that's going on in the UK with some of our collaborators, where Ofgem has now mandated data sharing from 2028, I believe, and they've done a lot of work through the Energy Digitalisation Task Force on the infrastructure required to do that and so on. So it's actually quite advanced and is going to be mandated from 2028. Now, that is one aspect, data sharing, but nevertheless, it does demonstrate it can be done.
Could I come in on that? I think if you look in the ISP, for example, at the underlying assumptions that feed into that big lump of demand side and consumer side stuff that is there, you can see there's a whole lot of things where there's just the policy and regulatory framework is missing. So on some of their vehicle to grid assumptions, for example, assume that 75% of people will have a car that is capable of doing vehicle to grid. If you want that, you have to change the Australian design standard for cars in probably the next 5 years, because cars hang around for 15 years. So there's a whole lot of things there where we actually need to look at what the underlying assumptions are here for that equipment and go, do we need to change the regulatory space? I hate to be a sort of, regulation is the only solution type person, but I think with a lot of these things, it is just simpler if we get the technical standards right now and we make them mandatory. And if we never use them, well, hey ho, we haven't lost that much, but we have a lot to lose if we don't get those right now.
Just to add one comment here, I think all of this becomes all the more complex and difficult if together we actually don't have a converging view of what kind of future power system are we trying to create. So, we can, one of the things that's noted in the report is that we've done tons of work, and in a sense, it's based on implicit kind of guesstimates about what the future is and focusing on different parts that we respectively have some control over, I think, as Alida was mentioning. But then when you zoom out, you say, well, but is there something a little bit kind of incoherent here at a national level, where on the one hand, we have these scenarios of kind of a dramatically different future state, and we all agree and we high five and we Mexican wave at conferences about that. And then we go back to our day jobs in our kind of respective silos. So I guess the question there is, there's so many things we can do with interoperability, name any individual topic, but there are some really fundamental questions about where are we trying to go? What kind of power system are we trying to create? What kind of structural relationships does that require that then actually informs our approach to interoperability and so on? And often yet we start almost in reverse. So I think that's just, something worth noting as well.
While we're on technical questions, and Ken Guthrie has been extremely patient, his was one of the first questions and it did get quite a few votes. So I'm going to ask it now, but just waiting for the right time. Ken's question is, did you consider non-electric use of renewables like solar for heat storage to balance loads and increase reliability? And we had spoken a bit about reliability earlier.
Yeah, I guess that's one for me, probably. So we tried to sort of, we didn't, by definition of this report, by definition, the risk is always how many oceans do we want to boil with this report. So we had to kind of try and deal with these topics at a level of abstraction that didn't open up, 6,000 research topics, I suppose. So what we tried to do is mainly focus on the relationship between this completely new asset class called CERs, DERs, and its relationship with this sharing system called the grid. And how do we actually better align the operational behaviors and incentives between CERs, DERs, and the shared platform called the grid. So we didn't necessarily go down every particular rabbit warren of, if you like, indirect utilization of different resources as an alternative energy source and so on. But I think looking at, if you kind of interrogate what's under the hood of the 6 themes and the 61 research topics, you'll see that on a number of areas we did sort of certainly approach some of those particular topics in a way that how their impacts on the grid, I think, was the primary lens.
Thank you, Mark. At this point, I've been told that we have just under 10 minutes for the session. And so what I'd like to do here is to provide our panelists, maybe we start with our original panelists, given the time, to answer, I guess, a consolidated group of anonymous questions that we have here on the Slido. So first and foremost, there's a really good point or a question here asking for your views on whether you think that this is more of a social and societal change rather than a technical change. And a couple of the other questions here that complement that is that, I mean, we have an aggregator here who has 2,500 customers with solar and batteries, and they say their biggest challenge isn't actually technical, it's actually breaking down the complexity to people. And another question here comes from the point of view of the rental market, or someone who's trying to address the rental market, recognizing that nobody really seems to want to tackle this, noting that there are some new rental standards in Victoria, but we actually need active projects to test out these types of models. So I'll go back to that original question, and I think this will close us out for the session. Putting it to the panel, what do you think of the comment that it is more of a social and societal change than a technical change?
I'll jump in first to give the others some time to think up their responses. Look, it's all of the above. The changes that transformation and transition of the energy system involves crosses everything. I mean, just to start with the technical side, we're moving from the traditional one-way flow from a small number of large generators to hundreds of thousands to millions of distributed resources that are going to have to manage dynamic operating envelopes at the network level, et cetera, et cetera. So the technical challenges of orchestrating and coordinating and having that effectively are immense. But at the same time, as has been mentioned, because when we're talking about CER, in most of the cases, we're talking about consumers' property, consumers' assets that they've invested in. That being able to bring them on the journey and have the understanding of the benefit of sharing, of opening up, of participating in orchestration is a significant challenge. Now, there are examples where this has happened before. I know, the chair of the AEMC, Anna, has commented about, we need to look at things like the success of, in drought times, getting water saving approaches which are enduring, and people only taking shorter showers and brushing their teeth for a certain time, etc., that can be an embedded behaviour that changes over time, even though the drought conditions may have changed. Or slip, slop, slap in terms of those education campaigns that may no longer be there but are enduring or only get updated every few years. So there is the societal change in terms of what the future of the energy system is going to evolve to. It's about bringing on the journey the understanding, the education, the awareness of the opportunities just as much as the impacts and what's going to change, which is going to be important. I'll go to the one about I'm quite interested in the one about the rental as well. I mean, again, to me, it's a multifaceted approach, as has been mentioned. It's not just within the energy market to solve that problem. It needs coordination across regulation, across standards. We can have new buildings that have to be upgraded, so the burden on existing landlords is lower. But at the same time, how come it's solving that problem? For example, I'm sure many people are aware of in Europe, balcony solar and batteries are a very widely deployed solution. But as I understand it, part of the challenge why that's not deployed in Australia is actually because of standards and regulation that are preventing those being put in. So if someone who's renting in an apartment can't put a small solar and small battery on their balcony and get the benefits of that, if they rely on the strata or the landlord to be doing that, how do we get creative about addressing and solving some of those solutions to open things up and accelerate, and that's where it is. As I said, to me, it's a multifaceted approach where we need to think creatively about what does the future look like and how do we solve for those problems now, even if it may take some time to get there.
Can I jump in on that? I think one of the things that humans are really good at imagining really crazy technological futures, and we're really bad at imagining social change. Like if you go back and look at pictures from the 1920s of what will the world be like in the 2020s, and they imagine all these crazy kind of technologies, and no one imagined the biggest change, one of the biggest social changes of all, which would be that women would be in the workforce in massive numbers and earn their own money and be able to vote and all of these sorts of things. We are bad at imagining social change. And I think this sort of goes to one thing, the question there about the rentals. One of the big social changes that is taking place is that we actually have a permanent rental class now. We used to think of renting as something that was temporary, and because of what has happened with the housing market, there are people now there's going to be a significant number of people who are lifelong renters, and that's a big social change. And so we have to have the imagination to think about how do we make sure the system works for those, given that is actually a real social change that's happened. I think often we shy away from those conversations about social change because they're awkward. It's much more comfortable to stay in the conversation about technological change. But I don't think we can keep shying away from that discomfort, because so much to go to the original question, this thing is both. It's not more one than the other. It's got to be 100% of both to really make it work, because ultimately this thing that's called the energy system was built by people for people and mostly consists of people and their behaviour. And so if we don't think about the people, we're not going to actually be thinking in a systems way at all.
I think adding on that as well, Alison, I think we are pretty good at being able to envision behavioral economics or nudge theory, or how that applies to how individuals make decisions and how we orchestrate that decision making in behavioral sciences. But I think there's also a need to be much more deeply looking at the sociology aspects of that and what are the structures. And I think what makes that awkward is that when you do look at that, it puts the onus back on government and regulation and big industry to think about how are what we're doing impacting how people are making decisions. So instead of just saying, or being in a room and saying we need to make sure there's benefits for customers in this and that the case is clear and that they understand it, it's actually how do we make sure that the structural changes kind of up the stream happens as well.
A very brief addition to that, I agree completely. It has to be both social and technical, and that is exactly the reason when we're designing this piece of national research infrastructure that we have both a social research component and a technical research component integrated into the one centre, because we have to address both.
Thank you to everyone for those insights. We've come to the end of our time for this open Q&A session, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to take down those questions that we were not able to answer in the session and respond to them if you have put your name against them there in due course. It's really been fantastic to explore the opportunity that exists in the rapid uptake of consumer energy resources and the possible benefits that lie within them. And we've really covered a lot of ground here, including the genuine challenges that we are facing when we are seeking to realise those enormous system benefits that can be provided through CER. It absolutely includes leveraging flexibility in CER to lower bills, improve grid resilience, and integrate more renewable energy. And there are technical and market aspects to this, but as that last question highlights, I think it's also the significant societal aspects that need to be addressed. And I really love the idea of improving our imagination. That seems like the funnest thing that I have heard in recent times to do coming out of a session like this. It's critical to focus on the research and technology partnerships that we can build. And we talked a lot about how we can, build a community towards these larger or loftier goals. And I really believe this is what a CRC like Race for 2030 can do and is doing at the moment. So it's been wonderful to be here at the invitation of Race for 2030. I hope that through this work that we'll be able to improve the quality of life of citizens as well as secure our future economic prosperity. But if you'll allow me to throw down one gauntlet before I finish, I suppose the onus really now is on us in the room to work together and take the report and the conversation that we've had and actually realise the opportunities that we've put down before us. So thank you again, and I'll hand over to Bill.
Thank you very much, Danny. And look, what an exceptional panel. Thank you, Danny, for your usual job of moderating brilliantly. Thank you very much to Alison, Alida, Andrew, and Stephen for your valuable contributions to the overall topic and looking at and understanding our work and providing valuable input. Finally, I'd like to thank Mark and his team at Energy Catalyst for the great work that we've done together on this. It's really been insightful. It's allowed us to think through and understand the sort of research that we want to help drive and to, I guess, build on Mark's analogy to put the rope between those climbers going up Mount Everest. So, really, I'm very, very happy with the outcome of this. Let's say the panel itself is exceptional, really building on and building that experience for us. So thank you very much. And thank you to all the participants that come along. We've got a great number of participants here, an exceptional number of great questions that have come through that we will respond to, and we'll send out the material that, as we discussed with the slides, and also the link to our Power BI tool, which gives more detail into this particular exercise. Thank you all.